Alright, my wife and I changed creeks. We'd already walked down this creek once. And we're coming back. And I see this. See, that looks like an Adena. Right there, let's get it out. Oh yeah. Nice one. So I was beginning to think I couldn't find arrowheads anymore. It's like my 4th or 5th time striking out. And my wife's been finding them, but I haven't. But there it is. Breaks my drought. Hope you guys can see that all right. Nice little Adena, looks perfect. We still got a long way to go to get back to the car.
That's it.
All right. Different creek. A couple hours later. It's an old crude Adena. There you go. Not great by any means, but still. Alright, hello everyone. Thanks for joining us today. Me and my wife we are in Union County, Kentucky today. Walking the creek. Thought we'd stop and make another little video about some inhumanoids. So today, I'm going to talk about the little people. Now, the little people of all the unexplained mysteries that I've ever researched, they're the only ones that I've found real solid evidence for. In the 80s, me and my brother found 2 pygmy flints, and they were so tiny. No way they could have been made by regular sized adult hands. So also found a little footprint was about 3 inches long in Reed, Kentucky. So I want to read you this little experience that was sent in to me years back by my good friend Stephen Wagner from paranormalabout.com. So this is about a canoe trip that happened in Ohio County on the Rough River. So here we go. On June 24th, 2003, I went canoeing in western Kentucky on the Rough River. I just wanted to get away for a little rest and relaxation, away from my normally hectic life. I put my canoe in at the nice little portage near the Falls of Rough, just downstream of the falls, which is not too far from Rough River State Park. The current was very fast because of all the recent rainfall. It was really just a typical canoe ride down a very pleasant and scenic river, or that's what he thought. I had a very funny, queasy, nervous feeling though. I was inexplicably anxious for some reason. Although I could not define why, I felt like I had something to fear, and I sensed death. Taking these sensations seriously, I was extremely cautious on the river because I didn't want the death to be mine. After several miles, I paddled the canoe to the riverbank and tied off to a tree. I got out to stretch and to explore the area. It's a little windy here. If you guys can hear me, I'll speed up just a little closer here. Okay. I climbed the bank and looked for a smooth, dry spot to pitch my tent. After deciding to camp near the water so I could keep a good eye on the canoe, I went on a little hike. I climbed up the hill and around the bend to a little creek that flowed back into Rough River. Looking down 8 or 10 feet into the creek, I spotted what looked like the top of a clay jar. I instantly recalled a dream in which I found some ancient pots. This recollection sent my imagination running wild with the thought that I might have found some old archaeological artifact. I started down the bank toward the creek. The bank was extremely slippery with mud, and down I went, sliding all the way. My backside and hands were caked with gooey mud, but I stopped just short of the water and very close to an old earthenware pot. It was more like a clay rock or a clay crock, and I quickly realized that it probably wasn't very old and that the bottom was probably broken as well. I poked at it and noticed that there were little handprints on it. I figured a raccoon had already searched it, but upon looking more closely, I saw that these prints were not like a raccoon's. They were more like little human handprints about an inch wide. As soon as that thought entered my mind, I dismissed it as preposterous. I started pulling on the jar, but it was stuck really well in the mud, with suction holding it down like super glue. I figured, well, I'm all dirty anyway. I'll just get a stick and pry this thing loose. After working on it for a while, it finally buzzed, but when it did, I heard something. I heard what sounded like little kids laughing. It was coming from down the creek several yards away, in the bank somewhere. When I at last managed to pull the crock jar out of the mud, something screamed. It sounded like a little girl, really high-pitched and loud. Man, I was scared. Who or what could it be? Not knowing exactly what to do, I grabbed the jar and began to scramble up that muddy bank. Glancing back, I saw something move down the creek. Now I was freaking out. I made it back up the bank and set the stoneware jug down. It was just a cylinder about 14 inches tall and 12 inches in diameter. It had a little rim about an inch down from the top. It was dark brown on the outside and light brown on the inside. I guessed it weighed about 5 pounds. And yes, it did have little handprints on it. That wasn't my imagination at all. I sat at the top of the bank for a moment looking at the jar, trying to reason away the handprints. It's no big deal, I finally decided, compared to that scream and those voices. Leaving the jar for a moment, I walked along the creek a ways and stopped every once in a while to peek through the bushes and see if anybody was there. That's when I got the shock of my life. When I looked over that bank, I saw 2 little people standing there about 10 inches tall. As incredible as that sounds, I'm not kidding. They had pale skin, little brown leather pants held up by suspenders, no shirts, and little pointy hats made of what looked like leather. They had leather foot coverings that went up past the ankle. Their hair was a reddish color and their eyes were blue. Their hands were only about an inch wide. They knew I was watching, but they continued their task. They were pulling some kind of wooden stump down their muddy creek bank with long leather ropes or strings. These little men were surprisingly clean, I remember thinking, for the work they were doing. Then I heard a thump back where I first went in the creek. I looked back and there were 3 more of them, men just like the first 2, and they had pushed that crock jar back down the bank. They were all laughing, high-pitched laughter like a bunch of kids. Then I heard a loud snap and they were all gone. Their footprints were plainly visible in the mud, but they were gone along with the crock jar and the wooden stump. They had vanished in a split second. A lot of these inhumanoids, if not all of them, seem to have that ability. My heart was racing and I struggled to catch my breath. I was feeling pretty insane. How am I going to tell anyone about this? Yet that's exactly what I decided to do. I walked almost 2 miles back to the old mill by the falls where I started. The stream was too fast to try to paddle the canoe back upstream. I had my cell phone with me, but it was just one of those emergency ones that I was going to use to call my girlfriend when I was ready to come home and she could come get me and the canoe. At the falls, I spotted a man in a pickup truck whom I assumed worked for the golf course they were building there. I told him that I needed a witness to what I had just seen. I didn't expect him to believe me just from my story, but I thought perhaps I could get him to at least come look. He told me to quit smoking that stuff. I practically pleaded with him to get someone else and we'd go down there together and I would show them. He flatly refused, saying I was crazy and that he wasn't going anywhere with me. Nearby was a cable TV repair truck. The repairman told me to get away from him too. I suspected that the guy in the pickup called the repairman on the CB radio or cell phone and I told him that I was crazy. Between what I had seen and reaction of these 2 guys, I was starting to feel a bit paranoid. I started to think they'll call the police and have me arrested, and I sure don't need that. I gave up on those 2 and decided to walk back downstream to the ditch where it all happened. I just had to look again. When I got there, I cannot explain it. It wasn't the same. There were no footprints, no sign of the little people at all. Where I slid down the bank was as clean as a whistle. No skid marks. The mud looked completely undisturbed. I was and still am absolutely positive that was the exact spot where it all took place, but there was no sign of anything. I loaded up my gear in the canoe and got the hell out of there. About 20 miles downstream, I camped out in a hayfield. That night, as I lay in my tent, all of the strangeness and impossibility went through my mind of the strangest camping trip I ever had. I just could not get those little people out of my mind. They knew I was watching them, but for a little while they didn't care, and then they vanished. In my mind, I could still hear them, like little kids on a playground, laughing and screaming and playing. Was it real? Am I crazy? They were real. When I told my girlfriend the whole story, she just laughed and told me that of the time she had seen a little green man under the lilac bush at her grandmother's house when she was little. She had no problem with it. Well, it's a big deal to me because I have to live with knowing what I experienced. It was just too strange. Little people indeed. Right, that's very strange. So I'm reading from my first book, Mysterious Kentucky. And I'll leave a link to it in the description if you guys want to read more about these inhumanoids. Okay, let's do one more little people story. Hope you guys can hear me. The wind's really picking up. Okay. Seeing is believing, right? This one's called The Little Monster. Or are some things seen by the naked eye just too fantastic and therefore beyond belief? Chris Walker wholly believes that he and a group of friends witnessed such a sight just before midnight on July 4th, 1990, when he was 14 years old. Chris, now 31, is a no-nonsense type of fellow, a family man with a wife and 2 children. He has worked in the construction industry for nearly 2 decades. He's not the type to lie or make up stories. Like his family, I believed him when he related to me the strange events of that Independence Day evening all those years ago. He and his buddies, he told me, had been sitting on a stack of old skids behind a factory building located on the east side of Henderson, Kentucky that night. This is right in the city of Henderson, Kentucky. One of them had a pilfered pack of Camel filterless smokes and passed it around. The mischievous quintet was sitting there, as kids are often wont to do, telling jokes and lies and smoking cigarettes. All of them knew they were too young to be doing it. One of them was only 10 years old. But doing what wasn't allowed was a way to be cool. Still, the 10-year-old was in Chris's care, and if they had gotten caught that night, he said, it would have been his ass. All around them were dumpsters and many stacks of old skids from the factory. Chris was busily engaged in the seemingly endless endeavor to be cooler than his other teenage buddies, tougher, braver, when all the boasts were cut short by a loud banging sound. As he turned to look and saw about 30 feet away a wooden crate sitting atop a rusted old BFI dumpster. The crate was moving each time the noise rang out, and the youths realized with much astonishment that whatever was making the noise was inside the crate and trying to beat its way out. The crate started to rock back and forth until it finally toppled from the edge of the dumpster and fell to the ground with a crash. What happened next, he soberly informed me, was the most frightening moment of his entire life. Slowly rising from the wooden debris was a dwarf-like creature covered from head to toe, with the exception of its face and hands, in short, dark hair of uniform length. The street lamp just down at the corner illuminated the thing and reflected red in the creature's eyes. Fully erect, it stood only around 3.5 feet tall and looked around frantically, turning this way and that as if disoriented or lost. The boys stared wide-eyed at the thing, glued to the spot by the numbing fear which froze them all. It had pointed ears like a pig's, red eyes, and a flat, wide nose. It had a mangy look about it. Some of the hair on its body was thin or bald, and the skin beneath was dark brown, while on its bare face and hands the skin seemed a lighter shade. The group watched as the thing continued to look around bewilderedly for about 10 seconds. Then, when the reality of what they were seeing actually sank in, their paralysis broke, and they all fled the scene with much haste, running all the way back to Chris's house, nearly half a mile away, without stopping. Of course, no one believed them when they told their stories. When I spoke to Chris about the encounter in 2006, I was able to gather more details about the entity's appearance. It was muscular, he told me, and it had the overall bodily proportions of a midget. Although the arms were of normal length, it had short, bowed legs. They couldn't see its feet. Moreover, it looked like it had been wearing clothing of some sort, which was threadbare and torn, hanging off its arms and legs in short, ragged strips. When the group fled, they dared not look back, he said, for fear that it might be giving chase. The next year, 1991, Chris was surprised by an impromptu visit from another friend who was not involved in, or even knew of, the aforementioned experience. Something seemed wrong with him to the point where Chris had blatantly asked him what was the matter. The youth was not willing to tell at first for fear of ridicule. But at length he acquiesced and said that as he was driving over the Washington Street Bridge, which spanned Canoe Creek near Lincoln Avenue, he heard what sounded like a woman screaming in pain. All these things seem like they sound like women screaming, or a lot of them. All these inhumanoid creatures, strangely. Then suddenly, a small, dark hair covered little thing ran out from under the bridge on two legs and up into the mouth of a large drainage tunnel. It stopped then and turned around towards the passing vehicle, letting out another high-pitched scream. It had red eyes and pointed ears. That these incidents actually happened, I have no doubt. What the hirsute little creature might have been and how it could have possibly managed to become sealed inside the crate to begin with will forever remain a baffling mystery. All right, well, that's a couple of little people stories here. I believe that these incidents actually happened, or I wouldn't be here reading them to you right now, and I certainly never would have put them in my book. So, if you guys like what you've heard, and you want to see more, be sure to hit the like and subscribe button. Tell your friends to come join in on the fun, and I'll be dropping more of these videos in the near future. And if you have an inhumanoid encounter that you'd like to get off your chest, or like to tell someone about, please feel free to email it in to me at inhumanoidencounters@gmail.com, and I'll see about reading it in one of my videos. Okay guys, have a great day. Thanks for joining us.